So we'll start by creating our NEXTJS project, and we'll use npx to create our app. Okay. And I'll name this app my app. So we will not be using TypeScript. We'll say yes to ESLint, yes Tailwind, no SRC. We will be using the app router, and we'll say no to customizing the import alias. And once it's complete, be sure to cd back into the directory that you just named your project. And we're going to type in a few dependencies that we're going to need. First will be mongoose, then MongoDB. This should care for our backend, and for the front end, we're going to use Axios. We'll also need React icons. Let's use React Toastify for notifications. And if we need anything else, which I believe we will for our dates, we'll install it later. Now, within our terminal, we should have our NEXTJS project. Within your root directory, you'll see the application installed here. So for us, right now, we're going to focus on the app directory. And let's do some cleanup before we begin our setup. So first, within our layout, I just want to remove the Google font. Next, I'm going to clean up the page.js. I'm just going to remove this main tag, type in a new one, and I'll just type homepage here just to have something. And then last but not least, within the global.css, I want to remove the boiler CSS that's already within Next. And I'll also set the overflow X axis to hidden, just personal preference, nothing relevant to the project. So just to make sure that this is working properly, I'll go ahead and close out those files. And I'll clean up my directory, or clean up the terminal, I should say, excuse me. And then let's type in the command npm run dev to start up our server on localhost. We should see that we now have a NEXTJS application, and we are on our home page, and we see the home page listed here. So now we'll set up our connection to our database, and we'll be using MongoDB to store our task. So go to mongodb.com and sign up for an account. Once logged in, let's navigate to the projects window. And from the project window, we're going to create a new project. Name your project whatever you like. I'm going to name mine Task Manager. From here, click Create Project. We should be redirected to the overview window. From here, let's click Create. Create will take us to the database deployment screen. We're going to go with the free tier for today's project. Feel free to rename your cluster if you like. I'm going to keep mine at the default. And also be sure to select the region that's closest to you. Once complete, click on Create. Now you'll need to set up your security. Be sure to update the password to something that you'll remember. We're going to need it in just a moment. Once you've updated your password, click on Create User. After you've clicked Create User, scroll to the bottom of the window and click on Finish and Close. This is going to take us back to the overview window, and from here, we want to click on the green Connect button. The Connect button will bring up options on how to connect to the cluster. For today's project, we're going to be using drivers. And once you select drivers, we've already installed MongoDB. Next, we'll want to grab this connection string and click copy. And once we've clicked copy, this is going to conclude the work, or this is going to conclude the setup of MongoDB. We'll come back to check our database just to make sure it's updating properly. So now within our editor, let's go back into the root directory and let's click on the .getignore file. And within the .getignore file, let's add .env. This is going to make sure this file is not shared within Git. And we can close it out, and let's add a file within the root directory as well named .env. And here we want to store the connection string that we copied from MongoDB. You'll want to store it within a variable named mongodb_URL. And you can paste in the connection string that we copied from MongoDB. Be sure to update your password. That way you have the correct access to read and write within your database. Now back within the root directory, let's create another file named libs. And within the libs folder, let's add a file named db.js. Now I'm going to paste in some code, and what this is basically a connection function that's going to utilize our NEXTJS application MongoDB connection string and access our MongoDB cluster. This is just basic boiler code. Feel free to copy it from the GitHub repo that's in the description below. Or you can just pause the video and copy this code. This is just one of the connection functions that you can use in order to connect the MongoDB cluster to our NEXTJS application. So with the connection between NEXTJS and MongoDB set up, now we'll want to lay the structure of our database of the content that we'll be adding within it. So we'll begin by adding in a directory named models. So within the contact.js file, we will be storing our models, and we're going to use mongoose in order to interact with our database. So we'll start by importing mongoose. From here, we'll want to create the contact schema, and our contacts will have a name. This is going to be the name of the person that we're storing within our contacts, and our contact will have an email, a phone number, and for this project, we're going to store our contacts within categories. We'll need to start by setting the type, which of course will be a string. And I'm basically listing out different categories: friends, family, professional, business, and secret. Feel free to modify this any way that you like, but this is just a simple contact structure that I wanted to set. And once you have this taken care of, let's go ahead and save the file. And now we're ready to begin to set up our APIs, and so that we will have a way to interact with our database. So we're going to utilize NEXTJS as a full stack project, and we're going to take advantage of its backend API structure. So within the app directory, let's create a folder named API. And within it, let's add a folder named contacts. And within contacts, let's add a file named route.js. So within our route.js, this particular route is going to hold two API endpoints: a post, which will be to create a new contact, and a get, which will be to get all contacts. We'll start by bringing in our database connection, and then we'll bring in the contact model. So the first function that we're going to create is a post request. So the first request that we're going to make is a post request. And within it, we're going to start with the database connection. We'll want to have a try-catch block, and within our try-catch block, we're going to take the information from our body, and we're going to use it to store a contact within our MongoDB database, and we want to store that connection within a variable named new contact. And once it's saved within our database, we want to send a message of 201 back to the browser. And we'll take the new contact data and we'll convert it to JSON and send it back to the browser. That way we can display it to our users. And then if we run across any errors, we want to send a status code of 500 back to the browser. So with this setup, I'm going to use Thunder Client to test out the API connection. Feel free to use Postman or Insomnia or any of the other programs to test it out. But if you have Visual Studio Code, go to extensions and you could type in Thunder Client and you'll be able to use this one as well. So I'm going to click on Thunder Client and I'm going to make a new request. I'm going to type in this localhost /API/contacts endpoint. And we are making a post request because that's the first API that we created. And we're using the body to send over the data. And I'm going to go ahead and type in a contact that we can test out. And if we click on send, we notice that we get a code of 201 indicating that it is created. So now let's go to MongoDB just to confirm that it is saved within the database. Okay, so now that we're back at MongoDB, we'll click on database, then browse collections. And we see that we have the contacts saved within the database. So with the post request set up, now we are ready to make our get request. Back in the route.js file, let's go ahead and create a asynchronous function named get. And we're going to start with the database connection and add in a try-catch block. And after we connect to MongoDB, we want to utilize the contact model and the .find mongoose method to find all contacts, and we want to store it within a variable name contacts. And if all goes well, we want to send a status back to the browser of 201, and we want to make sure that we are sending the contacts in a JSON format. And if we get an error, we want to make sure we're sending status 500. So let's go ahead and save this file and go back to Thunder client, and we can just change this post to a GET request. We see that we're getting a status of 200, which is okay, and we have our contact. Now we're ready to set up a API endpoint that will care for individual contacts. So within the contacts directory, let's add a folder named ID that is enclosed in brackets. So it's going to be open bracket, ID, close bracket. And within it, we want to add a file named route.js. And if you look at the route.js file, it should read route.js ID, which is enclosed in brackets, contacts, API, then app. So within the route.js file, we want to start by bringing in our imports. So we'll start with the database connection, and we'll also want to add in our contact model. And within this one, we're going to have 3 different requests. The first request will be a GET, which will be to get the contact by ID. The second will be a PUT, which will get the contact by ID, but also update it, And then the last one will get it by ID and also delete the contact from our database. So we're going to start with a asynchronous function named get, and we're going to establish our database connection. Now we'll want to create a ID, and we're going to use .params in order to do so. And we'll store that ID in a variable name ID. And within a try-catch block, we want to utilize that ID and the .find by ID mongoose method to find the contact within our MongoDB database and store it within a variable name contact. And if all goes well, we'll send a status of 200 back to the browser, and we'll convert that contact into JSON. By chance, if we get an error, we want to send the status code of 500. So to test out this endpoint, let's grab the ID from the contact within our MongoDB database. Back in MongoDB, if we copy this ID, we're going to utilize it to test out this endpoint. Now let's go back to the Thunder client request. And here, all we'll need to do is at the end of the contacts endpoint, we'll just add a slash and we'll add the ID. We see that we get back a status of 200, and it is returning the ID. So now the next request that we want to create is a PUT request, and this is going to allow us to update or to change our contact. Say someone got a new email address or a new contact number. We'll start by connecting to the database, and we'll utilize the params to get an ID. And within a try-catch block, we're going to grab the information from the body. First thing we'll do is identify the contact by its ID, and we'll find it within our database. And we're going to store this contact within a variable name contact. And we're going to update the post by utilizing the find by ID and update method. And this is just basically just some JavaScript that's just destructuring the information from the body and utilizing it to update our database. And we're using the mongoose method new and setting it to true. And if all goes well, we'll send a status of 200 to the browser, and we'll send the updated post variable back in JSON format as well. And of course, if we get an error, we'll be sure to send the status code of 500 along with the message. So let's save and test this out. So first we'll change it from a get to a PUT request. And instead of it being email at test, we'll make it test at test. We'll save this and let's send over the request. Notice that we get a status code of 200 and the email is now test at test. So the last endpoint we'll need to add is a delete. So we'll follow the same convention. We'll add in our database connection. We'll grab and identify the ID. And within a try-catch block, we're going to find the contact by ID and store it within a variable name contact. And then once we find it, we're just going to utilize the mongoose method find and delete, and we'll pass in the ID. And if all goes well, we'll send back a status of 200 saying that the contact was deleted. And if we get an error, we'll send back status code 500. So let's save this file and go back to Thunder Client. Now all we'll need to do with this is change it from a put to a delete. And if we send over the request, we see that we get status code 200. So it has been deleted successfully. So we've cared for the API endpoints, and that's how we'll set up a traditional CRUD application using NEXTJS with the app router, Mongoose as our database adapter, and Mongodb.